How you doing today? I'm Louis Armstrong, and I say this every time, and I like saying it sometimes. Sometimes I just like to be myself. I'm going to talk about the things in my new book, but the book that I have now is stuff that I covered in my earlier lectures and many more things I have to cover. The Judgment of America by Louis Armstrong and Black Nostradamus, Prophecy of America's Future. This lecture is so important that I cannot do it in one series. I have to do it, got to be several ones because of the significance of it. This is a revelation, and many revelations was given to me, but this is a revelation that have not been taught in any of the churches or any publications. And this is one of the most important ones, one of the most important ones that we need to know today as individuals in America. You have a culture that for so many years have told the Americans that that culture was the original chosen peoples out of Israel, that culture was Abraham's seed. But what you're going to find out today is that we're dealing with absolute truth. And absolute bring out a different viewpoint than what society deals with in a relative way of thinking of truth. And this is what's very important. You have checks and balances. You have to check everything. You know, because someone tells you something don't mean that means it's true. You got relative truth and you got absolute truth. And how I always say that relative truth is something that sounds right sometimes we accept it because it's culturally correct. And we accept that as a truth, but it's not always absolute. So we have to check the absolute from the relative to understand what God is truly trying to say. Because when we're dealing with God, we have to deal with absolute, not relative. Now, and this is not to come and bash the Jewish peoples. It ain't about that. It's about bringing out a truthism that at this time in human history need to be taught to the peoples because it has something to do with a great paradigm shift. And that's what it is. Over here, I put the word in a key by Hebrew typology and the paradigm shift. It has something to do with it because it's very important to know that we're going to go into a paradigm shift. You hear them talking about a new world order and all that kind of stuff in the atmosphere. And the atmosphere is saying that is correct. It's just that the way that organizations want to carry themselves and their families into this by ruling don't necessarily mean that that's how it's supposed to be. But you will have a paradigm shift. That will happen. Now, it's counting the stars, and it's dealing with Abraham and his seed. And it comes from the Genesis, the 15th chapter. What God said to Abraham, and I like to read that briefly. Abraham was, as the story goes, this is an allegorical writing. I must say that. It's an allegorical writing. But Abraham, God was promising Abraham a seed to be the ruler of his house. And so, Abraham didn't have one, but God told him that he will have one. And then he told him the environment that your seed will be in a later date. He also told him a territory, a land. The covenant deal with the land. And most people don't understand that, and they never read that very carefully. The covenant deal with that land mass. Now, this is an allegorical writing. So when you deal with allegories, you have to remember something that's very important. And that is that it's a typology. And this is what it means. It's a typology. It don't mean that that particular landmass that is in the Bible with those names is the landmass. That particular landmass or that area in the Bible trying to point to something that God wanted him to see. So in order to see that landmass, you got to be able to know that this landmass that he's talking about by using the term from the river Euphrates, from the Egyptian river and all that, he's talking about a land similar to that land. And that's why I got similarities and I got typology. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to give you a close-up on that because it's very important. If you look at this, you're going to see a landmass. You're going to see Florida and you're going to see Israel. In it, you're going to see Lake Okeechobee. Then you see that line go to another body of water, that go to another body of water. You see this in a lake, that line go to a body of water, and right up there, there's another body of water. This have a curve in it in the Mediterranean area. This have a curve in it in the Atlantic. Now, what he going to say up further in Florida, they have what you call the St. John River. Now, most people don't know it, and some do know, that the St. John River flows just like, and you're going to see this, and you're going to tell him in Genesis 18. The St. John, that's the covenant in Genesis 18. For the river, from the river of Egypt, which is the Nile River. Now you compare that with an area here, you got the St. John River. Both rivers run north, and most of all the other rivers run south, but this one run, the St. John River and the Nile run the same way. You got the Great River, and then you're talking a large body of water, and what you got a great river there, you got the Mediterranean. Here you got the great body of water, you got the Atlantic. And down here it tells about the river Euphrates, and I showed this certain scene when I showed the about Nineveh and Assyria and Jacksonville and America. You see the Euphrates River here, it's like being on the side of the Gulf of Mexico. So when you begin to see that Euphrates River, you begin to see that boundaries, and you see what he's trying to show us. So what he's trying to show us is a land abroad that's just like the land of Israel. It's a typology of the land, similarity of the land of Israel. And when you begin to know the founding fathers, how they done built America, they done built the new Israel here. Now, what we need to see is that in counting the stars, the reason it's so important because the Jews have said, well, we went through 400 years of affliction under Egyptian during the time of Moses, between Joseph's time and Moses' time. Now, what we're going to see, if you study the chronology of the time, we'll find out that Joseph's birth was around 7. This is not talking about when he became a grown man. We're going back to his birth. His birth was around 1795 BC. Until the children of Israel coming out of the land of Canaan under Joshua rule around 1503 BC was not 400 years. When you take this, it's only 292 years. So if you only got 292 years, how are you going to get 400 years out of 292 years? That's an impossibility. So we're going to look from Joseph's time to today and find out what is that really all about. Now, I make a lot of shortcuts. I make it plain. Making it plain is that those people, that seed is here because Abraham was taken abroad in his vision. So taken abroad means he was brought to America. Now I have a lot of points that I want to make sure that we see. Now, when we begin to see the covenant, we begin to see that it deals with a landmass. The covenant deals with a landmass and it deals with a seed. Okay. Now, later on, we'll find out, as you study the story about Jonah and the Son of Man, we know that the Son of Man came to America. Okay? And the Son of Man is part of that seed of Abraham. Now, we know that America is the prime area for this new paradigm shift to take place. Now, when we begin to study the beginnings of America, we're going to see through sacred geometry this 400 years. Now, this is one thing about truth. Truth, it's verifies self. And any way you take it, it's going to show itself as being truth. But if you take relative truth, it's always going to have problems because it's not total truth. It's just relative. It's the way somebody said it. Now, you can't take relative and put it against absolute and make it be a bit more than absolute. Now, we're dealing with absolute. And we're going to show you through the absolute, the relative way that we've been taught about who are the chosen peoples or who the Bible is talking about as these peoples of Abraham's seed. This is going to bring it out. Because God's language, and we have to understand, God's language is geometry, it's mathematics. And when you begin to see that, you can see this shows the name of God. And we begin to see pi 7, you've got pi, and that's 7 divided into 22, that's pi. 7 divided into 22, that's pi. And you see the name of God dealing with these 4. And you got this. Tetra is 4. Grammation, which is grammar, is showing you the number of understanding God's name. How you begin to understand God's name. How you begin to understand God's language. And if you try to avoid this and try to think that you could teach about God and leave all this out, it's another thing. You can't do that. The Hebrews, the Jews know you cannot do it. The Egyptians, the early fathers, and everybody know you could not do it. And it's just an impossibility of trying to accomplish that without. And what's been happening in the church is the church have been trying to teach it by leaving a lot of things out. By just literally reading and telling stories and getting people's hype in order to say, hey, this is the right thing. So it's been more of a motivational speaking type churches instead of a church that's teaching and the people the understanding of God's language. Now, if I say that this time started August the 1st, 1619, then I must prove it. And in proving it, I must deal with facts because counting the stars and sacred geometry got to fit with it. Because God told Abraham to count the stars if he could, if thou can. That means that this is not something that you're just going to look up in the sky and do. And Abraham then grew up in Egypt, came up in Egypt, or was dwelling in the area of Egypt, and Moses grew up in Egypt. And so they understood the knowledge, the sacred geometry. Now, the reason I'm getting into this because it's very important. We're going to cut it short and let you know what's going on. What is going on is that history showed that America, because it's a nation that have to be judged, a nation that these people are going to be in serving, and they're going to be afflicted. And when you begin to look at it, you're going to see what happened. History showed in Jamestown, and it's shown right here where you can find this information at, in the archives, on Jamestown. And it showed that the first representative legislation assembly met in the course of the Jamestown Church from July the 30th, 1619 to August the 4th, 1619. Okay? Now this was the first legislative body that started in America because God said the nation. He didn't say the nations. Now we know, everybody know, history shows that slavery did not start at 1619. Slavery started way before then. But what we have to always remember is study the scripture very carefully. He's not talking about the nations. Well, we know Spain was involved, the Dutch was involved, and many others was involved. The English were involved. But he's talking about a particular nation that they will serve and be afflicted for 400 years. And this nation that he's talking about is going to be the most powerful nation in the world at the time of the paradigm shift. At the time of the paradigm shift. And this is what we have to understand. Now, America right now is the most powerful nation in the world at this time, the time that the shift's supposed to be made. So when you look and put the checks and balances, this must fit America. Else it's not about those people that was in America who went through slavery. Okay? So we have to understand that. Have to be realistic with this. You don't make something happen. It's supposed to be on its own. It's supposed to fit on its own. Now, it's in August the 1st, 1619, a law was passed in there. Now we find out that over here, and I have to switch back and forth boards, over here, General Assembly passed laws, and they passed a law on tobacco. That's one of the first laws that passed on tobacco, the price of tobacco. But then you had Captain William Powers came and brought a petition. He brought a petition in the General Assembly against one Thomas Garner, one of his servants. And what that petition did, it gave way to the laws of affliction and punishing indentured servants and slaves from that time on. And that's where it started from. So we have to look at the laws, because God, if He's judging the nation, He got to judge them by not just what they do, but the laws that they create. Now, if we go from August 1st, 1619, and the star, each star, and you're dealing with sacred geometry, and you're going to see these. Each star is 50 years. You got, when you multiply 8 times 50, that's 400 years. But we're dealing with prophetic years, and your prophetic year is going to be 360 days a year. So you're going to see 144,000. Now, this same thing is put on the back of the dollar bill, and most people don't know what it means. They have no clue to what it means. They say, well, the 13 stars are the 13 colonies. It ain't about no 13 colonies. It's about sacred geometry. When you see the 13, you're going to see it right here. I'm going to show you where those 13 stars at. Let's go over here. The Fibonacci series. You got 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 80, 9, 144. When you come over, you got 13 places. That 13 is what they're talking about. These stars are scattered all around. That's the 13 places, 144. That's what that's all about. 144 with the zeros are 144,000, which is 400 years. That's what that's about. Once you understand sacred geometry, you'll know. When you see that, you see numbers in sacred geometry, you see these numbers I'm putting here, 50 years, you multiply 50 times 360, you see 18,000. Watch these numbers in geometry, in sacred geometry. You see 18. You see 18 in sacred geometry. You see 36. You see 36 in sacred geometry. Look at these numbers. 54. You see that in sacred geometry. And you see it in regular geometry. 72. 90. Go over here. You got that? Look at over here. 108. 126. 144. So when you begin to understand this, and you know you're dealing with 400 years, you begin to know that 400 times 360 is 144,000. You see this 144,000 in Revelation too. It said a number 144,000, but people don't realize what it's saying. That's allegorical writing. It's talking about in the circumference. The 144,000 are a time in the circumference where peoples are at. Include the history of a people. Then outside say a number that no man can number. That means you're going over into the paradigm shift, into the next age. And most people don't know that, but I don't want to get far into that right now. You see, the first 50 years, and 50 years is supposed to be a jubilee. It's a year you're supposed to let the slaves go. But did America do that? No. This 50 years is going to take you to November, and I got a chart for this. I'm going to show you a chart that is made up for this. You have to make a chart up that you can date every day with the number, with this. You start out with 18,000 days. And you're going to make that, convert them days from 360 to 365.25. and you make a chart where this will fit match up with our count today. That way you could get the date that you need from our 365.25 days. Now, that's very important to know. Now, the first point, and we have to go to that date, what was important in the life of that particular people and the nation at that time to deal with these people being afflicted. We see in November the 10th, 1668, the British slave trade from the Venice Island. This island is started. They started off the coast of West Africa. Now, but before they went shipping them to America. This started shipping them to America and other places. But America was one of the places that the British started shipping these slaves to. Now, before then, let's go before then. I don't want to skip the gun. Before then, at this time, the law was passed, and you're going by the law, the date of the law. Shortly after then, about 7 days later, and the governor Yulee, who the one who came to set up the assembly, and this is in Jamestown, Virginia, set up the assembly. He at that time, when this law was passed, and history got conflicting times. They're a day apart or something like that, several days apart. But they say between August the 8th and August the 10th, he bought 20 slaves off a vessel called the Lion. Okay, and you can find this stuff is in here. You can find this in the history of Jamestown. Okay, it's in there. It's in the archives and the history of Jamestown. So the information is there to find out about the first assembly. This is where America started. This is where God gave America the accountability of what it have and how it treats its people, and whether it's going to do good and make this prophecy and understand from this prophecy, or it's going to just do what America do. After then, you had them come to here, and that's where you had the British. Now, over here, this February 21st, 1718, now, some of these fall on the exact date. It's always going to hit the year, but some of them fall on the exact date, or some of them maybe a day off, but most of them fall on the exact date. That's what's so incredible about this. It falls on that date, February 21st, 1718, and you could go and Google this here, and you can find out about it. The French officer established rule to allow slave import into Biloxi. Where's that? That's the Louisiana Territory, Mississippi, all that area there. And you begin to see that all this slaves start pouring in, more and more slaves. And so you had nothing but slavery, and you had, you're going to deal with, I'm going to tell you about a golden age, dealing with a ratio, but I'm going to get into that later. Now, the next one happened was in June 4th, 1767. What happened? The Thompson Revenue Act was. Now, why was the Thompson Revenue Act? The Thompson Revenue Act was there because what you start having, bringing all them slaves in, you start having revolts. The slaves said, no, you see, if they were getting certain kind, they were getting slaves from everywhere. So you start getting them Zulu slaves or some of them other slaves, they ain't so friendly like the rest of them. And when you start bringing certain slaves in there, they're not going to want to serve no master. When they have had empires that they ruled, the Saudi Empire and Mali and all these places, they ain't going to just settle down and just take anything like that. So you start having these uprisings, you're going to start seeing this is going to start changing. Now, but they put the Thompson Act on, well, tea and glass and all that. But when you really get down to studying this act, the British soldiers and the officers, you got to take taxes and pay them because they was working trying to stop the uprising. To stop these people, the Indians was involved and all that, stop the uprising. Slaves was involved and all that. When you study some of the slave individuals that start uprising and see what time this was, you'll find out some of them fit right in that time. Now, what happened 50 years later? Now, each one of these is considered as jubilees as well. And what do it say in the scripture? Let the slave go, forgive the debt, etc., etc. See, America say it's a Christian nation, say it believe in the Judeo God. It say that, but it don't act with it. And this is why God said in the scripture, when he said to Abraham, For 400 years, he said to Abraham, for a surety, for 400 years, thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs. And they will be afflicted. They will serve them and be afflicted. But that nation will I judge, and they will come out with great substance. And we have to remember what it's saying, because God means what he's saying. Now, we got about 5 more minutes, and I'm not going to try to cover all this today. So we're going to cover the rest of it on another lecture, because it's too much to try to cover. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to get you here. Now, what happened after then? The British, you had, and at that time, of this one, this September the 14th, 1816, you had also the first black church. What was that about? Trying to teach them the philosophy of the distorted Christianity. Okay, and I'll say it like that, and I can prove it later, but I don't want to deal with it. So they became the AME church. Okay, a servant be obedient to your master type environment, and etc. So they was happy trying to use the black church to help them docile or make the black individuals more susceptible to the masters. Okay, now after this time, and you had the British and the Spanish saying no more. There was a power force at the time, especially Spanish. No more slaves import into these colonies anymore in this area. Then 50 years later, you come to December. Now notice this now. 50 years. This is very important. 50 years later, December the 6th, 1865. Now you look at emancipation and say, well, that's the time of the emancipation. Whoa. That was the time of emancipation, but that particular day, KKK. This is when the KKK first got record of them being developed, coming on the scene in this particular time. Yes, you got the Emancipation Proclamation happened at the first time, but this shows its head first. And we got to see this. Now, this is at the time of the emancipation, and we got to remember, the emancipation was not about Lincoln freeing those slaves, although that was added into it for military tactics. It was about the South breaking away from the North with secession, building their own nation, because they did not want to agree with Lincoln in selling the debt, the European debt that America owed. The 70-year, what they call the international law, has 70 years where this debt needs to be paid, and from when you look at the 70 years back over here when America became 1776, by the time Lincoln got to be president, those 7-year loan was due. So the South said, hey, look, and the bankers wanted. The bankers, international bankers said, well, look, you know, just the 13 colonies, you got 35 places now, 34 places. We want all that included in there. We're going to negotiate that loan. So Lincoln brought that to them, and they said, nah, they broke away from the Union. So you really, for a brief period of time, you didn't have no United States. And most people don't study it that closely to know. If they really get into the studying, you'll find out that Lincoln came and started bringing back the federal land under it, and then started a war against the South. And that's how all this stuff started. It was not because of slaves, because what did Lincoln say? Lincoln said he could go without freeing one slave, he would do that to save the Union. So it wasn't about that. So we don't, but this is very important. This time period is very important, because when you see the golden ratio, and you're going to see it over here, because it's all about sacred geometry. When you do the golden ratio on 144,000 and you divide that, you got to see it here. You got it in different areas. You take 144,000, you divide 1.618 in it, you get 88,998 days. 0.763 divide 365.25 into that, you're going to get 24,000.665 years. Then you add that on to 1619 when it started, and you're going to get 1862, 1863. What was 1862, 1863? When the Emancipation Proclamation was written. So you had all this time, America had free slavery into that. This was what they call a time that would put the peak on the golden age. All that time, these individuals got richer, than the landlords and the dukes and the lords of Europe. And these are the things we have to see. So what I'm going to do, on the next one, I'm going to cover this one, and that one. I'm going to get into the information here. I'm going to get in more into the paradigm shift. I'm going to get into America, and I want you to see this before I go off, because it tells about the iniquity of the Amorites, and the iniquity of the Amorites. This is a code. Amorites is a code name for America, and most people. And I like you to see that. I don't know if you can get a close up on this, but you got A, and it's done just like you take Assyria in America. You got A, you got M, then you got E. You take E from here, you put it over there. Then you got R, see that I. You leave this blank because you have no C there. You leave that blank. You got an A here. You take this A from here, you put an A there. Then you look there, you got a CC, and just put that, and you show Americans. This is what that means when you're studying from Hebrew typology. Because remember, it's a typology. And this is why most people can't understand the scriptures and the revelations of the scripture, because they want to see the scripture for what it is not. It's an allegorical writing, and it's an esoteric. The scripture was never written for the common people. It was written for the initiates and the elders. That's why the priests used to teach the people and not the peoples having the scripture. Because the peoples have always thought, oh, I can read this sentence. I can know what it's saying. Not possible. You have to be able to have a teacher who understands the language and be able to show you how all these things fit. Sacred geometry is a language that goes with the scripture. And the more we begin to understand that, the more we can see God in our life and where we are at in God today and why we are dealing with the situation we're dealing with. So I say to you, please listen to these lectures. Do what you can to help back this organization, because this organization is going to blow up. I already know that. No one is teaching this. This is more heavy than anything anyone have ever taught in churches. I already know that because I've been around. And I know it's out there. This has been sought back for this day and this time because it follows sacred geometry. Even in me coming forth, it's tied in with sacred geometry. And when you begin to see this, you're going to see this like you've never seen it before. And that's what's important. So I say to you, we end in this, but please, after this is over with, take this information as she showed on the chalkboard and try to see this for yourself. You have God that fix it where, boom, all you got to do is sit down and comfort your home, hit your cell phone, and your cell phone going to pull up this, pull up that, pull up that. God has put you in a time where you can know this. You don't have to go to the library and try to find all this information up. It's already on your cell phone. When God said you're going to do a quick work, that's what he meant. He got to bring your consciousness up to a higher level of seeing what's really going on. God got to show you that you could see him in the real time through this. We need to see God. And as we see God, we see him through what? His grandma. We see him through the numbers in the grandma. That's how we see God, the language of God. And that's what's very important. So I say to you, please stay in tune with listening to this for the benefit of yourself and your family, and be free to take this to other individuals and take each one of the lectures and learn that you can have a conversation piece. Thank you.